A prestigious corporate boardroom explodes with arrogant laughter when a poised, elegant black woman enters. No one expected her to be more than a guest, perhaps a new assistant. But when she calmly announces, "I'm your new owner," the room falls into a stunned, deafening silence. What follows is a powerful journey through racism, legacy, and unapologetic power, revealing a past filled with pain, injustice, and redemption, and a future no one saw coming. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The boardroom gleamed with marble arrogance, long mahogany tables, gold-trimmed decanters, and the sharp scent of money, old and inherited. Men sat like they'd always belonged there. Their cufflinks caught the light. Their smirks were synchronized. Laughter lingered in the corners like cigar smoke, stale and exclusive. The temperature dipped a degree the moment she stepped in. A hush came first, brief and skeptical, before the first scoff cracked open. "Lost?" A man on the left chuckled. Another tilted his chair back, arms crossed with a grin that belonged in a country club, not a place of innovation. "Mailrooms that way." A few more joined in. Laughter, rich and raw, built not from amusement, but entitlement. It wasn't that they found her funny. It was that they didn't find her possible. A black woman in that room? In that suit? It was like watching a pigeon strut through a lion's den. She stood poised, untouched by the sound. Her skin was rich walnut, her eyes carved from patience. Every curl in her tight bun sat perfectly aligned like the mission that had brought her here. Her heels clicked once across the floor. Another laugh, twice, a scoff, thrice. She stopped at the head of the table, placed her leather folder down, and without raising her voice, said, "I'm your new owner." Silence. Not just quiet, but frozen, breathless, disbelieving silence. The kind that happens after a gunshot or a prophecy. A pale man with thinning hair blinked rapidly, as if trying to wake himself. Another glanced at the nameplate in front of him, as if it might have changed. One older executive leaned in as if he'd misheard, but the truth was in her posture, in her calm, in her absolute certainty.
"I'm sorry, you're what?" Someone finally managed.
She didn't repeat it. She didn't need to. It was already echoing in every head. Her gaze swept across the room like a scanning beam, resting lightly on each face, and resting slightly longer on those whose laughter had been the loudest. She had expected the silence. She had prepared for the stares. What she didn't expect, what startled even her, was the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Not from fear, not even from pride, but from memory. Because as she looked at these polished men in polished suits, their mouths frozen mid-dismissal, she saw not them, but her father. She saw ash on his hands. She saw red dirt under his nails. She saw the night he came home reeking of smoke and failure. The night he swore this world would never break her the way it broke him. They didn't know her name yet. Not really. They would learn. But first they would feel the discomfort of their own assumptions dismantled in real time. The silence grew unbearable. One man adjusted his tie like it might choke him. Another cleared his throat, the sound unnatural in the cold. A tall man at the far end of the table pushed his chair back. "This is some kind of PR stunt," he said. His voice held the arrogance of someone who'd never been corrected. She opened the folder slowly, almost ceremoniously, and revealed documents, thick, notarized, binding. "These show my controlling interest. Purchased legally. Approved by the board chair and 2/3 of shareholders. Transferred as of last Friday." He scoffed, louder now, trying to reclaim the room. "There's no way the board would sell to someone like me?" she asked, her voice still smooth. "Someone who doesn't look like you?" Another silence. And in that silence, the walls seemed to lean in closer. The air thickened with revelation. "How did this happen?" someone whispered. A better question than he realized. Because this didn't begin here. Not with this room. Not even with this company. It began decades earlier with fire. With betrayal. With a promise whispered into the ear of a child whose bedtime stories were statistics and eviction notices. Her name was Malia Thornton. And though they didn't know it yet, her arrival wasn't just an ownership change. It was an echo returning from the past. An echo wearing heels and holding receipts. She hadn't always walked like this. Hadn't always spoken with this steady steel. There had been years of silence. Of swallowing racism like aspirin. Of wearing masks just to survive. But those years had been bricks, and she had built something they couldn't laugh away. Even now, the weight of that journey pressed beneath her smile. There was pain under the polish. There were names she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Places burned into her memory like cigarette scars. Every injustice had carved a part of her, and yet she stood whole. Not in spite of it, but because of it. She wasn't here to explain herself. Not today. Today was for watching their illusions collapse. But then her gaze locked on him. The man at the end of the table. Older now, gray at the temples, but still recognizable. The same crooked nose. The same dismissive smirk. D. Langford. Her throat tightened. It wasn't just the man who had denied her first business loan. Not just the one who laughed when her father begged for a second chance. It was the man whose company her father claimed had orchestrated the fire. Langford leaned back in his chair, clearly unsettled by her stare. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. That would come. But Malia remembered everything. And suddenly the room wasn't just a boardroom. It was a courtroom. A reckoning. A graveyard of every door that had ever been slammed in her face. Her smile returned, slower this time. Not out of triumph, out of truth. And truth, she had learned, was the most dangerous thing you could bring into rooms like this. She closed the folder with finality. "I'll be addressing changes shortly," she said. Langford shifted, arms crossed now. Her eyes narrowed. She leaned forward slightly, barely perceptibly, and said, "Some of you are here because you've earned it. Some of you are here because of who you replaced." Her words hung heavy, too complex to challenge, too direct to deny. Someone opened their mouth, probably to protest, but before they could, the conference room door opened again. A young black assistant stepped in quietly and handed her a small black case. She opened it, revealing a single artifact, a charred, cracked sign that read Thornton Printing and Copy, S9. The room recoiled, not because they knew what it meant, but because she did. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. The symbol was enough. It was older than all of them. It spoke louder than history books. Langford's eyes widened. Recognition began to flicker. He stared not at her face but at the sign, and then back again. His mouth opened slightly but no sound came. She turned the sign around and placed it at the head of the table, where the chairman used to sit. Now it was her place. "You'll want to take notes," she said softly. And just as the tension threatened to peak, just as the room adjusted to this new reality, Malia's eyes caught something else. A glint, a watch, a face. Her heart stopped. Sitting near the window was a man she hadn't noticed until now. He was younger than Langford, cleaner cut. But that face, he was there the night of the fire. Not just a witness, a participant. Her blood chilled. The man who destroyed her father's life wasn't just in the room, he was on her payroll. The camera lingers on his face as she processes the betrayal and prepares to expose the next layer of truth. A single shaft of late afternoon sun cut through the dusty Georgia air, catching the red clay that coated everything. The fences, the porches, the clothes hung out to dry. In the near distance, the tall pines stood like silent sentinels, their dark needles whispering against the stillness. A young girl, 6 or 7, with caramel skin and boundless eyes, reeled a battered red wagon behind her. Mud spattered its once bright coat, matching the smudges on her favorite dress. This was Malia Thornton, child of soil and survival, born into an invisible struggle none of the adults would openly name. She didn't know that one day, that same soil would become the foundation of her power. For now, it was the place her father Elijah called home, despite the whispers. They said the Thornton family got too bold. Opening a printing shop in this corner of rural Georgia was audacious. A black man running a business, printing flyers, pamphlets, school diplomas, a beacon against the expectation of roots-bound labor. Malia watched her father in awe as he greeted customers by name. He didn't just take money, he took pride, made art of invoices and letterheads. It was work sewn together with dignity. Malia's mother, Clara, scrubbed the same floors she'd been denied mortgages to buy. Her black skirts, starched and neat, smoothed the bank's tiles as though they might someday sparkle in rebellion. She tucked Malia in at night with fierce kisses and warnings. Stay quiet, keep hope alive. Winter came with threats as thin as the cooling sky. Elijah closed the shop early one March evening, kissing Clara's cheek, a promise of dinner and pride. Outside, the local church bells tolled, ironically, a lullaby meant for a community uneasy with change. Less than an hour later came the scream of metal and flame. Men in hoods, dark silhouettes against the night, pushed barrels of oil into the printing front. Malia's small ears caught the sound even as her mother pressed a cloth over her face to hush her. Next morning, Malia awoke to humiliation and fury in her parents' hushed voices. She crept down the hall, drawn toward the open living room door. There, the blackened shell of Elijah's business sign lay on the couch as if discarded mail. Smoke had seeped into the walls, leaned into the curtains. "Ma, what happened?" Malia asked. Her small voice was a fragile thread. Clara squeezed her hand, cradled her head with motherly strength. "Bad men," she whispered. They don't like us. Elijah stood stiff beside the sign, ashes on his boots. He didn't shout. He just looked at the charred letters, Thornton, turned black against the burnt wood. Over decades, he'd built this shop from spare parts and long nights. Now it was fine ash, stolen by fear and rage. The morning sun forced them to act. Clara took Malia by the hand and guided her outside, where neighbors watched from porches. Some nodded sympathy, others shuffled away. Two men, a banker and a local official, sidestepped them. The banker crossed the street, avoiding their eyes. "Working hard, Thornton," his wife called from across the way. "A bit overreaching, aren't we?" Malia saw how plain it was. Neighbors could love you or fear you, but they couldn't easily both. Because a black family with property in 1980s Georgia didn't just own land, they attacked the narrative. Elijah balanced grief and resolve. That afternoon, Clara left to scrub the floors of the very bank that had denied their loan the week before. She arrived in her clean black dress, as if she owned their shame, and laid tiles that still counted her dollar value in their minds. She scrubbed slowly so the smell of bleach would stay under her nails the next day, a reminder to them and to herself. Malia, missing school, followed her father on errands. They walked past the bank's heavy doors, into offices where white clerks barely glanced at them. But Clara, with her head held straight, made their presence unavoidable. She passed a stack of loan files, stacks of denial, the same forms Elijah had filled. Incomplete collateral, insufficient credit history, risky venture, forms stamped with finality, denied. Inside the printing shop's remains, Elijah worked with elbow grease. He couldn't burn away what had been built. Type blocks, ledgers, memories. Nail by nail, board by board, they began to salvage what they could. The old press, the metal cases of type still resistant to soot. Malia helped by picking up pieces. She learned there was dignity in every charred block they held together. At school, kids whispered, "Thornton's got too bold." The principal frowned when she asked for books on black history that weren't only about slavery and acceptance. Malia's answer was quiet rebellion. She asked again the next week. The principal ignored her. The whisper followed. One hot afternoon, after another bank shift, Clara taught Malia to write letters demanding respect. Letters to the banker's wife, the principal, the city council. She coached her, find the words, and showed her how a pen could be louder than fear. Elijah listened late nights, his hands moving over papers. Finally, one night at the dinner table, he cleared his throat. The family's voices dimmed in unison. He said, "We rebuild, but this time, we build more." His tone held a tremor, anger balanced with vision. Clara asked, "How will we do that?" He looked at her and her daughter, the two women who carried his world with strength. He said, "We've been poor but never broken. We get those loans, we prove them wrong. We build a company they can't burn down." That night, after dinner, Malia lay awake. She heard her father at the desk, his pen clicking. She smelled the ink, heard Clara's muffled weeping of pride. A plan was forming in the dark, not just to survive, but to be undeniable. Weeks later, when the banker refused again, this time to Clara's firm letter and damning statistics, Elijah still walked into that bank. He carried the charred sign on his shoulder, asked to speak with the director. Malia followed at his heels. When the director stepped back, startled, Elijah held the sign out like evidence. "Change your mind," he told her, voice low but unyielding, "or I'll show this to enough people that your bank loses more than a loan." Unseen door cameras recorded the moment. A black man demanding accountability, holding the ruin of his dream. The bank relented. At home, at night, the evening paper ran a photo. Elijah in front of the building, the sign half in frame. A headline called him defiant local businessman. Malia pasted that article above her bed. She didn't know fame. She understood principle. Yet every night ran a thread of fear. Footfalls outside the window. Rough rustling of gravel when no one was around. Clara's scrub dress grew shorter as she washed. Elijah began locking the doors early. The town watched. The whispers intensified. Thornton was starting to stir. It was dangerous. First brush with white supremacy came in a whispered threat. "You're next." It was scribbled on the bathroom wall of the school. Malia recognized the handwriting. 2 letters, circle A, KK. Malia's heart pounded. She could see the shape of the letters before her eyes closed at night. She told her parents, her voice steady but small. Clara sat beside her on the bed, tightened her braid, whispered, "We'll face it together." In that moment, there was no fear, but a solemn oath inside her. She clenched her jaw. She would not let this land define her. One evening, Elijah emerged from the shop with the charred sign again. But tonight he hung it in their living room, over the fireplace, unpolished blackened wood and cracked paint. Malia stared at it as they ate supper. It was out of place there, between the family photos and knickknacks. Clara's silence weighed heavier than her questioning gaze. Elijah looked at his family, folded his hands and said, "This isn't defeat, it's our marker. They burned it, but they taught us too. We learn from ashes." Malia felt a pulse inside her, not new but older than grief. It was determination. It was the blood of enterprising ancestors. Outside, the cicadas rustled. A simple hymn of life. But inside, the Thornton living room held a storm gathering, quiet yet fierce, ready to grow. Malia reached out, put her small hand against the blackened sign, and whispered, "We're not done." And behind her father, the sign rattled, as if it too believed. The sign hung like a relic, cracked and smoky in its place above the mantel. It remained there through every passing season, through every bill paid late, every prayer whispered early. Malia grew beneath its gaze, not softened by its presence but sharpened. By 13, she could recite every step her father had taken to rebuild his life. By 15, she vowed silently to never let anyone mistake her for less than extraordinary. And so, when her parents managed to move her into a more prestigious district through a strategic, technically legal address change, borrowing a cousin's address across the county line, Malia packed her books with clinical precision. This was her chance, not just out, but in. Fairfield High had towering white pillars at its entrance. Literal ones. The building looked like it had been built for senators, not students. Brick walls glistened with fresh paint, the lawns manicured within an inch of perfection. The only thing out of place was her. First day, her shoes were too plain, her hair too neatly combed. Her lunch was too practical. No avocado wraps, no boutique juice bottles. The stairs began at the curb and didn't end until the bell rang. She felt her skin every second. In her first honors English class, Malia took the front row seat. Her notebook was open before anyone else had unpacked their bags. When the teacher walked in, a tall, wiry man with salt and pepper hair and a khaki obsession, he squinted at the attendance sheet, then at her. "You're Malia Thornton?" he asked, slow and unsure. "Yes, sir," she said with practiced clarity. He glanced back down. Well, welcome. You can help pass out these course outlines." It was a subtle maneuver. Make the black girl the helper, not the scholar. Still, she took the stack without protest. But each step she took between desks planted another seed of resolve. She was not here to blend in. She was here to outgrow the walls that tried to contain her. The doubt didn't stop at faculty. Students were worse. Her first group project was a history presentation. The topic, post-Civil War Reconstruction. One white boy laughed and asked, "You want to act like a freed slave or something? You've probably got the dialect down." The classroom erupted. Malia stared at him, steady and silent, then delivered her part of the presentation flawlessly. The teacher gave them all an A. No correction. No mention of the insult. That night, in her bedroom, she cracked open a journal and began writing. Not school notes, truth. Thoughts she couldn't say out loud. She called the journal Red Ink. Page 1 started with, "Today I learned that success in their world means swallowing my scream." It wasn't always open hostility. Sometimes it was the near-constant second-guessing, like when she answered calculus problems too fast, and the teacher double-checked her math, or when she brought in a science fair project with original research, and the judge leaned over and whispered, "You sure you did this yourself?" Even her guidance counselor seemed to underestimate her trajectory. When Malia mentioned Harvard, the counselor raised a brow and said, "That's ambitious. Maybe look into state schools, somewhere diverse." Her parents didn't let the pain slide. Clara wrote emails. Elijah showed up to meetings. They played the game politely, but with grit. Still, Malia understood. She was alone in those hallways. Outnumbered, outwatched, but never outrun. Her grades stayed at the top. She joined the debate team, chess club, and mathletes, triumphing with a quiet fire. She knew her name would hang in the trophy case. But even there, she stood alone. Her photo always placed last in the display lineup. Junior year, everything shifted. A notice came down from the principal's office. Fairfield High had been selected to send one rising senior to a summer internship with Langford and Price, one of the state's most powerful business firms. Malia applied with her best essay yet. She detailed her passion for finance, her vision to create equity through entrepreneurship. She rehearsed her interview questions with Elijah for hours. Clara hemmed her blazer herself. The interview was held in a downtown tower that loomed above everything Malia had known. Glass and steel reflected a sky she wasn't sure she belonged under yet. Inside the elevator, she adjusted her cuffs, smoothed her edges. The receptionist looked surprised when Malia walked in. She gave her a forced smile and gestured toward the waiting room. Every other candidate in the room was white. Every suit cost more than her family's grocery budget. No one smiled back. An older white man eventually called her name. He didn't offer a handshake, led her into a windowless room. The questions were sharp and condescending. Have you ever worked in a professional environment? Can you see yourself in a setting like this? How do you manage assertiveness? It wasn't an interview. It was a trap. At the end, he asked, "Why do you want to be here, Malia?" She answered, "Because I plan to own companies like this one. And to do that, I need to understand the mechanisms they use to keep people out." There was a pause. He smirked. When she left the building, he didn't walk her to the elevator. No thank you, no closing remarks. But she held her chin high anyway. Pride and fury mixed behind her ribs like acid. 2 weeks later, the internship was awarded to the son of a board member. The school posted the announcement in the lobby without acknowledging Malia's name was ever in the running. That night, red ink got a 5-page entry. It began, "Their doors are white, but their walls are black." Still, she didn't stop. Malia learned to maneuver around systems. She found allies where she could. An English teacher who slipped her books by James Baldwin. A custodian who smiled and said, "Keep going, baby." A library staffer who let her stay late, writing essays that burned holes in ceilings. But even within those fleeting kindnesses, the resistance was relentless. Some students mocked her speech. Others questioned her test scores aloud. Once, while waiting in line for lunch, a boy leaned in and whispered, "You know your ancestors worked here, right?" His friends laughed. She didn't flinch, just stared ahead, took her tray, sat alone. But her grip on the fork tightened. By senior spring, Malia had written over 200 pages in her journal. Stories, quotes, plans, patterns. Red ink became her secret arsenal. Her strategy for understanding how white supremacy worked in silence, through architecture and algorithms, through smiles and policies. Then came the final twist. One crisp Monday morning, Malia opened her locker like always. Books, her folded gym shirt, and something new. A note. Folded once, plain paper, no markings. She unfolded it carefully. 4 words, written in black marker, scrawled across the page. "You'll never sit at our table, not." She froze. The hallway noise faded. The air around her slowed. Someone brushed past her shoulder. She didn't move. Her throat tightened. Her fists clenched, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Slowly, she folded the paper again, slid it into her notebook, walked to class. That night, she didn't eat. She didn't speak. She simply turned to the last page of red ink, wrote the date at the top, and began. "They think their table is made of gold, but they've never seen a woman build her own table from fire." The next morning, as Malia opened her locker again, another note was waiting. But this one read, "Someone's watching. Be careful who you trust." She stared at the note again the next morning, her locker cold like a warning bell. Someone's watching. Be careful who you trust. The handwriting was different, sharper, neater, almost protective. Malia didn't report it, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was too practiced to play into systems designed to discredit her. If the first note hadn't drawn an apology from the school, this one would only draw suspicion. She could already hear the questions. "Are you sure this isn't just a misunderstanding? Could you have imagined it?" Instead, she added both notes to the back cover of red ink and pressed them flat. 2 bookmarks, 2 proofs. That night, she sat at her desk, cracked open a fresh notebook, and began something new. Not a journal, not essays. Letters. The first one was to the principal. She addressed it properly, with grace and authority. "Dear Principal Hargrove, I am writing to inform you of the cultural cancer growing beneath your polished floors. When your students use plantation jokes and write hate speech, and your teachers dismiss it with silence, what grows is not misunderstanding, it is learned supremacy, and silence becomes your signature." She paused, read it aloud, then placed it gently into a shoebox labeled "Sent Truths." The irony burned. It became a nightly ritual. After homework, after dishes, after the weight of the day had settled into her shoulders like a second spine, she wrote. One night, a letter to the local school board. Another, to a regional news station that had praised Fairfield High's diverse excellence. Another, to the office of a senator who had tweeted about equality during Black History Month, but never mentioned police reform or school funding. She never mailed them. Each letter was a release but also a record. An archive of injustices that deserved documentation, even if justice wasn't guaranteed. She knew better now that institutions didn't react to whispers or pleas. They only reacted when forced. But there was one thing she'd come to understand deeply. Silence was currency in white institutions. The more silent a black girl stayed, the more palatable she became. Noted but not disruptive. Celebrated, so long as she didn't embarrass anyone. In AP Government, her essays were praised for their balance. Thoughtful, her teacher wrote in red pen. You present both sides well. What he meant was, thank you for not making us uncomfortable. What he didn't know. The unspoken side was the truth. The side that burned in her bones. Still, Malia played the game. Spoke when spoken to. Debated politely. She delivered polished answers with a smile sharp enough to draw blood, but no one looked close enough to bleed. During a Black History Month assembly, she was asked to recite a Langston Hughes poem. The principal suggested I too, soft rebellion, mild patriotism. She declined, submitted her own poem instead. It wasn't chosen. That night she wrote again. Dear Langston, they want your rhythm but not your rage, your melody but not your meaning. They don't understand that I too sing America is not a plea, it's a warning. The letter to Langston joined the others in the shoebox. She labeled that night's envelope with a single word, witness. In every room she entered, she was the only one. Only black girl in AP Chemistry. Only black student in Model UN. The only one in every photo on every club wall. At first, it made her feel proud, exceptional. But over time, it felt like being made into a mascot. People remembered her name because she was easy to remember. The only one with that shade of skin, that shape of hair, that aura of restrained fire. She learned how to armor herself with achievements. Every A was a shield. Every award, a layer of steel. But even armor gets heavy, especially when no one else is carrying any. Her parents noticed. Clara would press a hand to Malia's back and ask, "You sleepin' enough?" Elijah just watched her eyes when she spoke, trying to catch whatever she wasn't saying. She never let them know the whole truth. Her rage had transformed by then, not into bitterness but into something colder, focused, strategic. She began to see everything as a system. Every hallway, every hiring choice, every headline. Racism wasn't just a thing people felt, it was engineered. She wasn't mad at her classmates anymore. She was mad at the machine that made them think their cruelty was clever. One evening, her debate coach gave her a ride home. On the radio, news played about a CEO who'd stepped down over racist comments made in a leaked email. He was an idiot, the coach said casually, chuckling. But if you ask me, everyone says things they don't mean. World's too sensitive these days. Malia didn't answer. Later, in her room, she wrote again. Dear Mr. Anders, you said everyone says things they don't mean, but I've never accidentally said lynch, or animal, or ghetto trash. You meant every word. You just didn't mean to be heard. The letter stayed in the box, but the rage stayed in her chest. She began copying the letters to USB drives, then to encrypted folders. By then, she had written over 80, a private manifesto hidden in plain sight. Every file titled like a war strategy, witness, reversal, exposure, exit plan. One night she asked her father quietly, "Did you ever want to burn something down?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at her, his eyes full of the old fire she'd inherited. "I wanted to burn down every lie they made me swallow," he said finally, "but I decided I'd rather outlive them." That became her motto, outlive, outbuild, outlast. The final semester of high school came. College applications were sent. Malia was accepted into every school she applied to. Full rides, honors tracks. One even called to say they were thrilled to diversify their campus with her. She said thank you, hung up, wrote another letter. Dear Admissions Committee, I am not your statistic. I am not your redemption arc. I am not the cherry you place on top of your unseasoned legacy. I am the storm that's coming. But the most important letter she ever wrote didn't go into the box. It was written at 2:06 a.m. on a spring night. Her window cracked open, moonlight cutting lines across her carpet. Her journal was full. Her notebooks were sealed, but her rage needed a new target. She pulled out a fresh envelope, printed in neat black ink. D. Langford. Langford and Price Investments. Atlanta, Georgia. She didn't know if it would ever reach him. She wasn't sure she wanted it to, but she needed to name the ghost. Dear Mr. Langford, you don't remember me, but I remember you. I remember your elevator, your questions, your indifference. I remember how your firm chose legacy over potential. I remember how you stared at my ambition and saw a risk, not a promise. And I want you to know something. One day, I will sit in a room you thought was built without me in mind. One day, I will walk through your walls, and when I do, I won't knock. I will own them." She folded the letter, slipped it into a manila folder, labeled it, "One day." Years later, when Malia stands in that boardroom as its new owner, the envelope addressed to D. Langford will resurface, unopened, unread, until now. The envelope marked "One day" still sat at the bottom of Malia's desk drawer when she packed for college. She didn't bring it. Not out of fear, but discipline. She knew it would find its place in time. Briarwood Business School was the kind of place that didn't just teach capitalism, it performed it. The buildings were stone and glass, clean-cut and symmetrical. Everything exuded prestige, from the ivy-draped columns to the corporate recruiters who strutted through campus like royalty. Malia arrived on a full academic scholarship, one of only 6 black women in her year. The welcome packet featured smiling photos of diversity. The reality was whiter than snow. She quickly realized that, here, her presence would not be challenged with open mockery, but buried under subtler violence. Professors praised her clarity, but never invited her to networking events. Classmates smiled tightly, but forgot to include her in group projects. Everything was polite. Everything was perfectly arranged to exclude without ever having to say it out loud. But Malia had learned how to adapt. She wore ambition like armor and intellect like a sword. She sat in the front row. She asked the hardest questions, and she made it clear without apology that she wasn't here to survive. She was here to lead. In her second semester, a professor took notice. Dr. Julian Cartwright, white, mid-40s, Ivy League bow-tie energy. He was known for publishing articles in Harvard Business Review, for speaking at World Economic Forums, for mentoring high-potential students. He had once advised a Fortune 100 CEO, and he made sure everyone knew it. But when he spoke to Malia, there was a warmth, an almost fatherly tone that disarmed her. He praised her analysis during a case study on racial wealth gaps, called her brilliant in front of the class, invited her to office hours to discuss big ideas. She was hesitant at first, but Dr. Cartwright seemed different. He listened when she spoke, asked questions about her upbringing, her parents. When she told him about the printing shop, the fire, the letters she never sent, he nodded with genuine interest. "You've lived a reality most of these students couldn't dream of understanding," he said once, tapping his pen against a yellow notepad. "You should write this. You should frame your experience into a model, something teachable, powerful." So she did. Over several meetings, Malia built a framework. She called it economic firewalls, the 5 invisible blocks between black entrepreneurs and capital. It was structured, layered, filled with historical data and anecdotal narrative. Each block was tied to a real-life barrier she'd watched her father face. Each solution had been tested through her family's pain. Dr. Cartwright was impressed. He asked if he could use it in a lecture. "Just for discussion," he said, "with your name, of course." She agreed. Trust hadn't come easily to her, but she wanted to believe that someone saw her, valued her. Weeks passed, then months. Their meetings grew less frequent, but she assumed it was the semester's pace. She focused on classes, internships, and the invisible weight of being exceptional among people who believed she was lucky to be there. One afternoon in early spring, she stopped by Cartwright's office, hoping to ask for a letter of recommendation. His assistant told her he was out of town, presenting at a private equity conference in New York. When he returned, he was vague, distant. "I'll get that letter to you soon," he said, then changed the subject. The shift unsettled her, but she buried it, focused on finals, on survival. Until one cold Thursday afternoon, while browsing in the campus bookstore, she froze. There, displayed near the front, a glossy new hardcover. Systems of Exclusion, Invisible Economics in Modern America, by Dr. Julian Cartwright. The title alone caught her breath, but it was the subtitle that chilled her, featuring the firewall theory on capital denial in minority communities. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Chapter 4, 5 Firewalls. Each one word for word was her model. No credit, no acknowledgement, not even a footnote with her name. Malia's stomach turned. Heat crept up her neck like a rising tide of betrayal. She shut the book and stood there, stunned, while 2 white students beside her picked it up and complimented its fresh take on inequality. Her heart beat against her ribs like a drum, not out of fear, but humiliation. She had handed him her pain, her legacy, her language, and he had published it as if it were his. She left the bookstore in a daze, walked across campus with a silence so loud it ached. In her room, she pulled out a legal pad and began writing furiously. "Dear Dr. Cartwright, I see now that mentorship in your world is just extraction wrapped in praise. You mined my trauma like data, used my fire to warm your reputation. But remember this, I may not own a printing press, but I have something more powerful, a memory, and it doesn't fade. She didn't mail it. She added it to a new box beneath her bed. That night she opened red ink again. It had been months since she'd written. But now the pages filled fast. Every word was acid, every line a blueprint. She began researching copyright laws, academic ethics, cases of plagiarism covered up by tenure, and she began building again, not a paper, a plan. Because if he could publish her work under his name, then she would make sure that one day he'd sit in a room where her name was on every wall and he couldn't afford the admission. A few weeks later, during a networking event hosted by the business school, she spotted something that stopped her mid-sip of sparkling cider. A woman in a sleek pantsuit, standing near the buffet, holding a copy of Cartwright's book. On the lapel of her jacket, Langford and Price. Malia's vision narrowed. The name hit her chest like a memory. The same firm that laughed her out of a room as a teenager. The same one whose elevator ride began her rage. The woman was a recruiter. She chatted with professors, handed out business cards, and in her hand was Malia's stolen theory, wrapped in another man's name. A storm moved inside her. That night, she updated the file titled One Day and changed the name to Target 01, Langford and Price. As Malia closed her laptop, an email alert pinged. Subject line, Internship Opportunity, Langford and Price. Your name came highly recommended. The email blinked at her like a challenge. Subject Internship Opportunity, Langford and Price. Your name came highly recommended. There was no signature from Dr. Cartwright, but the timing screamed his name. A peace offering dressed as opportunity. He must have passed her name along after seeing her face that night, after spotting her glare in the hands of the recruiter holding his book. She didn't reply. Not then. Instead, Malia printed the email, slid it into a new folder, and wrote across the top in bold black ink. I will not walk through their door. I will buy the building. By 23, she had done what few dared, launched her own startup, a fintech platform called LoopBridge, a sleek, scalable engine designed to connect underserved Black entrepreneurs with micro-investors, mentorship, and scalable pitch-ready assets. The tagline was simple, bridge the loop, build the legacy. She wore thrifted blazers and pitch scars with equal grace. Her decks were clean, data-backed, and visionary. Her numbers weren't just solid, they were strategically airtight. But when she stepped into investor rooms, the applause never came. The first investor called her idea naive. The fifth said it was overly niche. By the 14th rejection, a woman leaned forward, smiled sweetly, and said, "You're very passionate. But are you sure this isn't a nonprofit mission?" By the 27th, the laughter returned. It was a Friday, a midtown conference room with panoramic windows. Malia had delivered her pitch, paced precisely, paused at the moments designed to land like thunder. When she finished, a man in a navy suit with slicked back hair leaned forward and said, "You're a bit intense, don't you think?" "Passion's not a bad thing," she answered calmly. He chuckled, poured himself a glass of still water, and said, "In a boardroom it is." 42 rejections, 42 closed doors. Each no was stitched with patronizing tone, thinly veiled racism, and the shared assumption that she was asking for too much space in a world that had only ever offered her a seat near the wall. But Malia had stopped asking. Instead, she pivoted. She turned to Black-owned banks, small, steady institutions built out of necessity and resilience. She met with investment collectives led by Black women, CEOs who had carved empires without press, without permission. She found her tribe in quiet boardrooms and kitchen tables where equity was a movement, not a margin. These weren't billionaires with sandhill offices and legacy trust funds. But they listened, they understood, and more importantly, they bet on her. She stacked her capital in silence. 10,000 here, 50 there, 100 from a retired pharmacist who said, "You remind me of my daughter." She created shell accounts, flipped intellectual property into silent partnerships, and let her tech do the talking. LoopBridge quietly grew, not fast enough to make headlines, but fast enough to gain traction in forgotten neighborhoods and whispered newsletters. The same investors who laughed at her, some of them unknowingly invested through third-party accelerators she acquired. She didn't correct them. She didn't need their validation, just their money. She kept her face off the website, let her white co-founder handle surface PR, while she pulled the strings from the shadows. It wasn't fear, it was strategy. They praised the tech, loved the UI, said it felt universal. Malia smirked behind the curtain. She had built a Trojan horse out of code and clarity. Her days were spreadsheets. Her nights were post-it walls and whiteboards with red string maps linking venture firms, political donors, and legacy CEOs. She didn't dream of funding anymore. She dreamed of acquisition. It was during one of those late-night mapping sessions that she circled back to a name she hadn't forgotten, Langford and Price. She knew their structure inside out, knew which firms held silent shares, knew which chairs were aging, which board members had weak portfolios, and which hedge funds had recently backed out of underperforming assets. Langford and Price had started leaning into crypto, and their diversification strategy had exposed them. The market saw them as conservative. Malia saw them as vulnerable. She created a proxy shell company, Gravemont Holdings LLC, neutral name, no trace. She approached a weary investor who owned 3.7% of Langford's private shares and had publicly expressed disinterest in retaining equity after a PR crisis. He sold. She found another minor stakeholder, bought 0.6% more. One final purchase, silent, clean, under radar. Within a month, Gravemont Holdings controlled 5% of Langford and Price. No press release, no public splash. But in her bedroom, Malia stared at the signed agreements and whispered the only word that mattered: leverage. That night, a notification appeared on her private Loopbridge dashboard. Someone from Langford and Price had just signed up under an alias to study her model. They didn't know they were walking into her system. Malia didn't sleep the night she saw the alias tied to Langford and Price on her dashboard. The name was innocuous, J. Merritt. The email was a placeholder, but the IP address told the truth. Midtown Manhattan, internal server, the same subnet used by Langford's legal department. They were watching. Not the world, her. She leaned back from her desk, heart pacing but smile unwavering. Let them observe. Let them try to understand the ecosystem she'd built. It wasn't just a company. It was a mirror, and soon they'd be forced to see themselves in it. But beneath the satisfaction was something older, heavier. A name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, now surfaced fully in her mind, dredged from the red dirt of her past. Darius Langford. The man behind the logo. The architect of legacy built not from invention, but absorption. Buying out flailing businesses, gutting them and leaving their cultural bones as trophies. His firm had a long track record of rescuing minority-owned companies, only to rebrand them and erase their origins. She remembered his face, not from billboards, not from bios, from that interview room. Years ago, at 17, when she entered Langford and Price as a finalist for that internship, the one they offered to a board member's son. She had pitched her future with trembling hands, sharp words, and starched sleeves. And from the shadows of that panel sat one man who didn't speak much but watched her closely. Later she found his name on the firm's executive page. Darius Langford, founder and CEO. And her father? Malia Thornton had once brought his business proposal to Langford and Price. Back when the shop was still alive, hopeful, and unburned. It was Langford who denied him. Not just with silence, but with malice. According to Elijah, the firm had been instrumental in redirecting contracts from minority printers to larger white-owned firms under the guise of efficiency. 2 months after Elijah's final rejection, the shop was burned to the ground. There was never proof, only timing, only pattern, only pain. Now Malia sat at her desk, staring at the modern ghost of that same empire. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't respond. Instead, she clicked open a new folder and labeled it Langford Debt in Full. She studied the man like a strategist preparing for war, watched old interviews, analyzed board member connections. He was polished in public, gray hair always trimmed, suits crisp, diction sharpened by years of dominance. But between the words, she heard the entitlement, the condescension. She saw how easily he dismissed equity initiatives as cosmetic gestures, heard the smirk when he talked about survival of the fittest in the business world. His company's diversity page featured 2 interns and a recycled quote from MLK. But it was a photo that haunted her. A feature in Forbes about legacy leadership. Langford stood with his executive team. At the far right was a younger man, same chin, same cold eyes, Langford Jr. She zoomed in, heart still, blood loud. It was him. The same boy from her college interview panel, the one who'd laughed when she mentioned building generational wealth, the one who leaned back and asked, "And how do you plan to get anyone to trust you with capital?" She'd never forgotten his voice. His smirk. Now he was vice president of strategic acquisitions. Of course he was. Nepotism wasn't just a system, it was a lineage, and Langford and Price had made an art out of inherited advantage. Malia saw the chain now, father to son, power to power, privilege to profit. And in that chain she was supposed to be another crushed link. But chains could be broken, reforged. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. She wasn't trying to destroy Langford's house. She was going to own it, strip it of its false grandeur, and rebuild something righteous on the ashes. A week later, Malia received an invitation to a private equity summit. Langford Jr. was listed as a featured speaker, and her name was on the same panel. The invitation to the summit arrived on a Wednesday, printed on thick ivory cardstock, inked with a gold emblem that screamed exclusivity. It was addressed to Malia Thornton, CEO, Loopbridge Capital. No mention of her race, no hint of her rage, just a name they were finally forced to recognize. Langford Jr. would be there, sitting 3 chairs down. And this time she wouldn't be pitching dreams. She'd be presenting power. But even as her name entered those rooms, Malia knew better than to arrive empty-handed. Power without leverage was decoration, and she had no interest in being ornamental. She withdrew from the panel 2 days before the event, politely. Scheduling conflict, her assistant emailed. In truth, she had other plans, deeper, slower, sharper. While most people chased visibility, Malia pursued velocity, not of attention, but accumulation. She started quietly, behind closed contracts and masked LLCs. Loopbridge's success gave her enough clout to build momentum, but she needed scale mass behind the message. So she began curating a new kind of fund, invisible on the surface but rooted in legacy, a pipeline of wealth for Black-owned tech and media ventures. She called it Ashroot, a name born from the fire her father survived and the soil her mother cleaned. Ashroot didn't ask for headlines, it asked for justice. It backed developers, who were overlooked, storytellers whose scripts never got read, AI engineers whose resumes were filtered before the interview. She built it through 4 shell companies: Marrow Innovations, Halvin Group, Digger Capital, Night Hollow Ventures, each name innocuous, each team fronted by white or racially ambiguous partners. People Malia trusted, not for their skin, but for their silence. Her face stayed off paperwork, her fingerprints masked beneath legal fog. It wasn't deceit, it was design. Through these entities, she began making moves. First, she bought 0.3% of Langford & Price, buried in a healthcare acquisition. Marrow completed in a bundled asset buyout. Next, 1.1% through Halvin's partnership with a retiring real estate magnate looking to liquidate. Digger Capital pulled in a sliver through an overseas arbitrage fund. And Night Hollow? That one was special. Night Hollow purchased a distressed logistics startup owned by one of Langford's subsidiary partners. The deal included a shadow stake in Langford & Price. By the time the dust cleared, she was sitting on just over 4.5%. It wasn't majority. Not yet. But it was oxygen in a room she wasn't supposed to breathe in. And then came the soft war. The whispers, the invitations, the lunches. Board members began reaching out, curious about this unknown presence behind the shell companies. Who's your founder? Where are you taking these assets? Let's align. She responded through intermediaries, always calm, always distant. One by one, she earned their trust. Not with charm, but with results. The firms were growing, profitable, unproblematic. Malia was showing them what power looked like when it didn't ask for attention. One senior board member at Langford, an older man with a crumbling portfolio, met with her anonymously through one of her proxies. Over dinner, he said, "I'm tired. Legacy isn't what I thought it would be. I just want to get out before the next cycle hits." She bought his 4% share on the spot. Now she was at 8.6%. Still small, still quiet, but a storm was building. She expanded Ashroot's influence into media, funded 3 Black-run digital storytelling companies. One of them broke a national story about discriminatory hiring patterns at Langford & Price. Another produced a documentary called White Paper: How Legacy Firms Rewrite Black History. It trended on social for a week. Malia never tweeted about it, never acknowledged her fingerprints. She didn't have to. The industry felt her presence in the tightening of belts, the hesitation in boardrooms. People didn't know where the pressure was coming from, but they felt it. She kept moving. 10%, 13%. At 17%, Langford's internal analytics team flagged Ashroot's entities. They began tracing connections, suspecting collaboration, but it was too late. By then, Malia had layered ownership across enough legal buffers to deflect scrutiny. She wasn't just infiltrating. She was designing a hostile ecosystem with a velvet touch. At 21%, Langford's CFO reached out directly. He scheduled a meeting. Malia accepted. Walked into the Manhattan high-rise, wearing a tailored black suit, and a soft gold pin her mother had given her. The same one Clara wore the day she scrubbed the bank floor that denied their first loan. The CFO looked at her and said, "I've done some digging. You're not new to us, are you?" She smiled. "No, I've been watching for a while." He didn't push further. He didn't need to. By the time she left, he knew the truth. So did Langford Jr. At 33%, Malia began calling in favors, board members she'd quietly supported in their side ventures, one she bailed out from a tax scandal, another whose child was funded through an Ashroot scholarship program. They voted with her in secret. They whispered her vision in strategy sessions. One even slipped her a list of the firm's weakest shareholders, men and women looking for exits. She targeted them, one by one. Months passed. 40%. Then 47.3%. At 49%, Langford Jr. publicly denounced anonymous acquisitions and radical interference in traditional investment models. His comments went viral, but his reach was slipping. Malia watched his interview from a downtown cafe, sipping tea as she annotated her own path to ownership. 2 weeks later, she met with the final shareholder, a 71-year-old widow in Savannah, whose late husband had left her 2.2% of Langford & Price stock. She listened to the woman talk about the company's legacy, about how her husband admired Darius Langford, even modeled his business after him. Then Malia leaned in and said softly, "Did he ever know where Langford built his first million? It was on contracts stripped from black-owned firms during the 80s. My father's was one of them." The woman blinked. The history landed like truth finally given permission to speak. She didn't say much after that, just nodded slowly. A week later, the papers were signed. 51.2%. Malia's phone buzzed with a single message. "It's done. You now control the board." She looked up at her reflection in the cafe window and saw her father's eyes looking back. Malia didn't take a car. Not today. She left her apartment just before sunrise, wrapped in a slate-gray trench coat and quiet resolve. The air was heavy with pre-storm silence, the kind Georgia carried in its bones. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not her assistant, not the board, not even her security detail. She needed to feel it. Her steps slowed as her shoes touched cracked sidewalks lined with overgrown hedges and rusted chain-link fences. Her childhood neighborhood hadn't changed much. The porches still creaked, the mailboxes still leaned, the red dirt still clung to the tires and memory like ancestral blood. She passed Miss Kendrick's house, once the only neighbor who brought them food after the fire. Her wind chimes still rang in hollow tones. A faded lawn sign read, "Black Lives Still Matter." Across the street, a group of kids played near the curb, kicking a deflated soccer ball between puddles. One of them stopped, eyes wide. He pointed. "Is that her?" he asked aloud, loud enough to pause the game. The others turned. "That's the lady from the news," another said. "The one with the money. The one who owns a company now." Malia gave them a small wave. They didn't wave back. They stared like she was a hologram, someone they had only seen through pixels and comment sections. She turned the corner before they could ask for a photo. Her breath was steady, but her chest was tight. The closer she came to her childhood home, the more the imposter inside her stirred. Not loudly, just enough to whisper, "Are you sure you belong in that boardroom? Are you ready to lead people who were raised to see you as a risk? Do they know how scared you were that day your father didn't come home on time?" The house looked smaller than she remembered. Age does that. Or maybe power does. The door was freshly painted, but the foundation still held its original scars. The porch steps creaked under her weight, and for a second, she was 10 years old again, waiting for her mother to open the door, for the scent of cornbread and bleach to hit her like a second skin. Clara opened the door with that same familiar calm. Her hair was gray now, coiled in a silk scarf. Her face bore soft lines carved by grief, prayer, and unshakable belief. "You're early," she said, smiling like she'd been expecting her for years. "I couldn't sleep." Clara stepped aside, and Malia entered like a ghost returning to her own legend. The house smelled the same, like lemon polish and old secrets. The burned sign still hung above the mantel, just as it had all those years ago. Clara moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing tea. Malia stood in the living room, staring at the sign. "How many people told you not to hang it there?" she asked without turning around. Clara chuckled from the kitchen. "Everyone. Said it was too much. Said it would scare company." "Why did you keep it?" "Because it reminded me that nothing burns forever." They drank tea in silence for a while. No talk of takeovers. No mention of stakes or proxies or Langford. Just the clink of ceramic and the shared weight of what tomorrow meant. Later, as the sky darkened, Clara reached into the drawer of the old hallway table and pulled out a leather-bound journal. The spine was frayed, corners softened by time. "This was your daddy's last one," she said, handing it gently to her daughter. "He never let me read it, said it was for you, one day. I figured the day before you owned the place that denied him. That's close enough." Malia took it slowly, reverently. It smelled like old ink and red dust. She opened the first page. "They will not remember us as victims." She read every word. Some were plans, others prayers. Some passages were dark, filled with doubt, grief, and rage he never dared speak aloud. He talked about Malia's future, about how scared he was. She'd carry his fight longer than she should, about the fear of dying with his truth buried. The entries thinned as the pages turned. But on the last one, dated a week before his heart gave out, was a single word: win. Nothing else. No signature. No metaphor. Just the demand of a man who had spent his life fighting fire with paper and dignity. Malia closed the journal and held it to her chest. Not as proof, as permission. She stayed the night in her childhood room. It still had posters from her debate years, the scuffed desk where red ink had been born. Her laptop sat unopened on the floor. She didn't need it tonight. She lay on her old twin bed, the journal beside her pillow, and stared at the ceiling as thunder rolled outside. Somewhere across the city, Langford Jr. was probably sipping scotch, reviewing his board talking points. Somewhere, a journalist was preparing tomorrow's financial headline. Somewhere, a black girl was writing her first journal entry, thinking she had no idea where it would lead. Malia knew different. She fell asleep hearing her father's voice, not as it had sounded at the end, but as it once was, booming, proud, stubborn. Win, baby. Just win. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, Malia's phone buzzed. A private message from a restricted number. "He knows. Langford's preparing a vote to block you. You have 12 hours. 12 hours. That was all the warning she got. "He knows. Langford's preparing a vote to block you." The message had no signature, no context, just urgency. Malia stared at it for a full minute before standing. She didn't panic. Instead, she folded her father's journal, placed it inside her briefcase, and zipped it shut like a soldier lacing up armor. The message meant Langford was scared, and scared men made mistakes. By 6:43 a.m., she was dressed black suit, no jewelry, no softness. Her curls were tied high and coiled like a crown, every edge deliberate. She took nothing with her but the proof, the portfolio, and the journal. By 8 Swiren, she was walking into Langford and Price's glass monolith in Midtown Manhattan. The front desk greeted her by name. "Welcome back, Miss Thornton." But this time, no fake smile followed. They knew who she was now. The receptionist stood a little straighter. Security gave her space. The elevator ride was long and silent. Each floor ticked past like a decade. Each ding a reminder of every no she'd been fed like medicine. She didn't flinch. Her breath was slow. Her thoughts clean. By the time the doors slid open onto the 47th floor, the executive boardroom level, Malia was no longer the girl with pitch decks and rejections. She was the storm. She stepped into the corridor, heels echoing down the marble, past portraits of white men whose names filled investment textbooks, past closed doors that had once kept her father begging on the outside. She paused before the grand double doors of the boardroom. Her fingers brushed the steel handles, cool to the touch. She could hear faint voices behind them, laughter. The same kind of dismissive chuckle she'd once endured in internships, in classrooms, in narrow hallways of white entitlement. Malia didn't knock. She pushed the door open and walked in like she had never left. The room was full. 12 men, 2 women, all in tailored suits, polished watches, posturing still intact. Their laughter stopped like a record scratch. One man, Langford Jr., smirked as he turned toward the door. "Did someone call catering?" he joked under his breath, just loud enough to be heard. Another exec gave a half laugh, unsure. Malia didn't blink. She walked to the head of the table, his seat, the chairman's, and placed her leather briefcase down with precision. Langford Jr.'s eyes narrowed. "I'm sorry. Can we help you with something?" She met his stare. "You can start by pulling out your minutes," she said calmly. "This meeting is no longer yours." The room froze. Langford leaned forward. "I'm sorry. Who exactly?" "I'm your new owner," she said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It hit the air like thunder inside a cathedral. Someone coughed. Another shifted in their seat. Langford Jr. laughed once, a dry, defensive sound. I'm sorry. What? He said, still clinging to disbelief. Malia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick spiral-bound portfolio. She placed it on the table. Every shareholder agreement, every proxy signature, every acquisition trail through her 4 shell companies. She said nothing as they read. Langford's smirk twitched. The older man to his left leaned in, scanning faster. His face paled. This can't be right, he muttered. Malia sat down slowly. It's been right, she said, for over 2 weeks. This board has been under my control since 4:37 p.m. last Thursday. Langford Jr. pushed his chair back. You forged this, or bribed someone. I bought you, she said, still calm. Legally, strategically, quietly. One of the board members at the far end finally spoke. She's right. I confirmed it with our counsel this morning. We're over the 51% threshold. Langford Jr. stood now, chest rising. This is absurd, he snapped. You don't have the experience. You don't have the pedigree. You're not qualified to lead. Qualified by whose measure? She asked, voice still low, still lethal. No one answered. She rose from her chair and walked toward the window wall behind them. This company, she said, turning to face the room, was built on exclusion, on absorbing businesses that couldn't fight back, on denying capital to people who looked like me, and calling it strategy. Her voice didn't rise, but it filled every inch of the air. My father came to this firm, in 1984, asked for a contract, a chance. He was laughed out of the room. A few months later, his shop was gone. She let that settle. And now, she said, his daughter owns the room that tried to erase him. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was reverent. Langford Jr. tried one last time. I want to see legal proof, he said, voice low and bitter. Malia reached into her case, pulled out the final notarized documents, and handed them to him with a smile so steady it rattled his spine. He looked down at the papers, scanned them. His face turned ash. She leaned slightly forward. Oh, she added. And if you're wondering why the board let it happen, ask them. They sold you out. I just paid what you were worth. Before Langford could respond, a notification buzzed on his phone. He looked down and froze. Malia smiled wider. You're going to want to read that, she said. It's the press release announcing the leadership change. It went live 5 minutes ago. The room froze like glass beneath a hammer. Langford Jr.'s hands trembled as he stared at the press release lighting up his phone. The headline was simple, devastating. Langford and Price appoints new majority chair. Malia Thornton, named controlling owner. There was a sharp inhale from someone across the table. A sudden shift of air. Then, thud. A board member, Raymond Bellamy, 72, staunch conservative, legacy donor, collapsed sideways in his chair. His assistant rushed in from the hall, alerted by the sound, and caught him mid-fall. The room barely flinched. No one stood to help. Because Bellamy's collapse wasn't the real emergency. Langford Jr. dropped the phone onto the table like it had burned him. His face was drained of color, eyes darting from line to line of the press release. He couldn't speak, couldn't blink, couldn't stop the inevitable. Someone else, a woman in navy named Karen Fletcher, stood quickly, grabbed her purse, and stormed toward the door. This is illegitimate, she spat. I won't be part of some race-based publicity stunt. Malia didn't look at her, didn't offer a rebuttal. Silence was her scalpel now. I have worked for this firm for 24 years, Karen continued, voice cracking. Not from injustice, but from power slipping away. This is a disgrace. She slammed the door behind her as she left. The remaining board members sat in varied stages of paralysis, some confused, some calculating. One man, Whitaker, whose son had once interned with Langford Jr., looked at Malia like he was seeing the apocalypse, or a mirror. Langford Jr. finally found his voice. This is a coup, he whispered. You bought your way in here? Malia tilted her head. You inherited your way in here, she replied. I simply played by your rules, and won. He stood abruptly, pacing. His jaw clenched so hard the vein in his temple pulsed. You'll destroy this firm, he said, pointing. This was never about business. It's personal, a vendetta. Malia smiled calmly. It's restoration. Restoration of what? He barked. Black trauma? Some twisted moral crusade? Restoration of balance, she said. Of value stolen, of names erased, of voices silenced by men like you. He laughed bitterly. You think that buying out shares gives you the right to lecture us? You wouldn't last 10 minutes running this firm. You think being a victim qualifies you to lead? The word hit the room like a slap. Malia stepped forward. I was never your victim, she said quietly. I'm your reckoning. Langford's breath caught. Someone gasped. Across the table, a woman from legal began reviewing the documents again, flipping pages with urgent fingers. Then she looked up, pale but resigned. It's all valid, she said to the room. Every percentage, every proxy vote. Everything was executed legally. Langford Jr. shook his head, pacing now like a caged heir. You rigged this. You manipulated people. No real investor would back. Malia raised a hand. Enough. She didn't shout, but her voice cut through him like glass. I didn't come here to be congratulated. I came here to reclaim, and I'm not here to convince you I belong. I've outworked every man at this table for the right to sit at it. No one moved. She leaned forward slightly. You kept me out of this room for years, she said. Now I'm not just in it, I own it. Langford dropped back into his chair like his body had given up. His hands went limp in his lap. Malia reached into her briefcase once more and pulled out a smaller folder. Slim, marked only with the company logo. She placed it in front of her, took a breath. This company, she said to the board, will survive, but not like this.
A few people sat straighter.
Malia flipped the folder open. Effective immediately, I am announcing an executive reorganization. Langford Jr.'s head snapped up. What? Malia met his eyes directly now. For the first time, her voice carried heat. This company has operated for decades under a structure designed to exclude, exploit, and erase. That ends today. She turned to the rest of the board. There will be an independent equity audit. Every department will undergo diversity and ethics reviews. All hiring pipelines will be restructured. Pay disparities will be published and addressed. A few murmurs rose. And the C-suite, she added, will be restructured. Langford stood. You don't have the right. I have 51.2%, she said. That is the right. He stepped toward her. You can't fire me. Malia took out the final page of her packet, turned it toward him. Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions is not protected under our current bylaws. You serve at the pleasure of the board, which, as of this morning, I control. His lips parted, but no words came. You're being replaced, she said softly. Effective immediately. As Langford Jr. stood frozen, the boardroom door opened again. In walked a poised, sharply dressed black woman holding a laptop. Malia turned to her and said, Meet your new interim VP. She's from a firm you laughed out of the room 5 years ago. She stood and walked slowly to the end of the table. I'm not here to gloat, she said. Her voice was low, but it pulled every ear. This isn't revenge, and I didn't do this for a headline. I came here to hold up a mirror. She gestured to the glass wall behind them. Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond it, gleaming and cold. For decades, this view has belonged to men who didn't have to earn it, who inherited power not because they were the smartest or most innovative, but because they knew someone who knew. She paused, then continued. Comfort, she said, is currency in America, and racism is what built the bank. A few faces flinched. She stepped closer to the center of the room. I want to tell you a story, she said, one you've probably never heard. Some leaned forward. There was once a black man in Georgia. His name was Malia Thornton. He owned a small printing shop. Nothing fancy, just ink, paper, and a dream. Her voice began to gather weight, memory curling into each word. He printed diplomas for kids who'd never see their names on billboards. He printed flyers for black-run churches, funeral programs, even newsletters for civil rights lawyers. He served his community, but that made him a threat. No one moved. He was denied a loan by a bank that said his business was too unstable. Weeks later, that bank funded a white-run printing company across town. A few months after that, his shop burned down. The air in the room shifted. Malia took a step closer to the head of the table. Her fingers brushed the edge, but she didn't sit. He filed a report. No one followed up. He wrote letters. No one responded. Because he wasn't a victim with power. He was a black man with ashes in his hands. Her voice faltered, but only for half a second. I was 9 years old, she said. I watched him bring the charred sign home and hang it over our fireplace. And every night I did homework under it. Every night I listened to my parents whisper about what was stolen. Not just money, but dignity. A pin could have shattered the silence. My father died before he could see me graduate college, before he could see me buy my first company, before he could see me walk into the room that once erased him. She paused again. But I didn't come here to burn it down. I came to rebuild what should have never been broken. A man on the left shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Malia turned to him. You think racism looks like fire and rope, but it's also in the contracts you rewrote, in the board seats you reserved for your sons, In the way you say we tried to find a black candidate but none were qualified. A ripple moved across the room. She stepped toward the end of the table. You say you value diversity, she said, eyes moving slowly across each board member. But you measure it in optics, not outcomes. You hire one black executive and call it progress, while your culture remains untouched. And when people like me enter the room, you ask if we belong here. No one spoke. This table, she said, resting her hand flat on the oak, was built on the backs of people you never met, people you never thought about. My father, my mother, countless others. She took a breath. And now you will. Malia turned toward the glass wall again. You will look at yourselves in this mirror and see not just your resumes but your reflexes. The way you flinch when a black woman speaks with authority. The way you confuse assertiveness with aggression. The way you praise inclusion but fear disruption. Her words hung like smoke. This mirror, she said softly, isn't here to punish you. It's here to reveal you. She turned to face them fully, now. I own this company, she said, not just legally, but ethically. I earned it in silence, in scars, and in shadows. And from this moment forward, we move differently. Malia reached into her briefcase and pulled out her father's burned sign. Restored, cleaned, but still scorched. She set it gently on the table. This, she said, is your new legacy. And then, from the far right of the table, a choked sound broke the stillness. A woman mid-40s, blonde hair tied tightly, trembling hands covered her mouth. Malia looked at her, puzzled. Tears slipped down the woman's cheeks as she spoke, barely above a whisper. My father, she said. He was a firefighter in Georgia, retired early. Before he passed, he told me something. He said there was a black-owned printing shop that went up in flames. Said they were told not to interfere, that it was ordered. Her voice broke. And she stopped, swallowed. I think it was your father's shop. The boardroom didn't breathe. Malia stared at her, unable to speak. The woman stood slowly, visibly shaking. My father told me he watched it burn, and he never forgave himself. The woman pulled something from her purse. A photo. A Polaroid, yellowed with age. It showed a street, smoke, and in the bottom corner, just barely visible, a hand-painted sign. Thornton Printing and Copy. She held it out to Malia with trembling fingers. Malia took the photo with slow hands. The room didn't move. The image was grainy, faded by time, but still loud with truth. The storefront was charred, smoke curling into the Georgia sky. A small sign leaned at the edge of the frame, scorched but readable. Thornton Printing and Copy. She traced the edge with her thumb. For a long moment she said nothing. Let the history settle into the center of the boardroom, like a memory come home. Then she folded the photo gently and placed it beside her father's restored sign. We begin today, she said quietly. The meeting that followed wasn't like any Langford and Price had seen in its long-gated history. Malia stood at the front of the room with her sleeves rolled, her presence firm but not theatrical. She called in her general counsel and her transition team. Camille stood by her side, holding an iPad with contracts queued and ready. The board sat in a mix of quiet surrender and reluctant awe. First, she signed a series of funding agreements. $20 million redirected into Ashroot Ventures' reparative grant program. These grants weren't loans. They weren't seed capital with strings. They were gifts, direct reparations to black entrepreneurs in tech, media, health, and education. Recipients had already been vetted. These were people who'd been told no for years. Brilliant founders passed over for not having the right connections, the right accent, the right last name. Now they'd have more than funding. They'd have access to Langford's old office spaces, now converted into collabs and incubators, legal teams, marketing teams, legacy infrastructures, reassigned, not dismantled. This boardroom, Malia said, will no longer be a gate. It will be a gateway. Second, she launched the Thornton Fellowship, a fully endowed leadership program for young black executives and future founders designed to train them not how to enter systems, but how to own them. And then came the final phase of the meeting. Change, she said to the board, is not a speech. It's a structural shift. She turned toward the legal chair. Please issue termination notices to the following executives. She listed 3 names. 3 men. All white. All senior executives who had, over the past 6 months, resisted DEI reform efforts, downplayed race-based reports, and most recently attempted to move funds offshore after news of her acquisition leaked. 2 were not present. 1 was. He scoffed. This is personal, he said. Malia didn't flinch. No, this is precedent. But You tried to erase what you couldn't control, she said. Now I'm correcting the record. The man stood, slammed his folder shut, and stormed out. No one followed him. The silence that followed wasn't passive, it was productive. Over the next hour, Camille projected timelines on the screen. Cultural audits, new hiring pipelines, mandatory ethics training tied directly to executive bonuses. There would be accountability. There would be transparency. There would be legacy. Earned, not inherited. And Malia. She wasn't just a CEO anymore. She was a symbol. By that afternoon, news had spread. Her press release had gone viral, shared across every platform, dissected in headlines and hashtags. Black woman reclaims racist empire. Langford and Price now black-led. From ashes to assets, Malia Thornton's his historic takeover. Her inbox overflowed. Some congratulated her, others sent threats. She ignored both. This wasn't about applause or backlash. It was about repair. That evening she returned to the same boardroom, this time alone. The lights were dim. Her father's restored sign sat on the center table, beside the Polaroid and the folder of grant approvals. She stared out at the skyline. And for the first time since she was 9 years old, she felt still. Not silent. Still. Behind her, the door opened. Camille entered, phone in hand. You'll want to take this. Malia turned, brow raised. Camille handed over the device with a small nod. It's the White House. Malia blinked once. They're asking if you'd serve on the National Economic Equity Council. They said they need someone who knows what real power redistribution looks like. Malia didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the skyline again, then down at the photo, then back at Camille. Tell them, she said slowly. I'll think about it. After I finish cleaning this house. Camille smiled, but before she could respond, the second phone in her hand buzzed. She glanced down. Her face changed. There's something else, she said. Langford's legal team just filed a challenge. They're trying to freeze the grant funds. They're not done fighting. By the time Langford's legal team filed the challenge, the press had already crowned her a revolution. Malia didn't flinch. She simply pivoted. The lawyers claimed fiduciary irresponsibility, that reallocating funds toward reparative initiatives endangered shareholder value. It was textbook obstruction, designed not to win, but to slow her down. But what they didn't account for was that Malia had already prepared. Before the press release, before the signatures, she had formed a legal strike team under Camille's oversight, stacked with pro bono racial equity attorneys and contract law strategists. They filed counter-motions within hours, citing her controlling interest, public benefit exemptions, and ESG precedents now widely embraced by global capital markets. The firm's request to freeze her grants was denied within 72 hours. The money moved. The system hadn't changed, but Malia had learned to beat it from within. And the world watched. News spread fast, not just through social media or business channels, but through neighborhoods. In the same community where Malia once stood outside a burning building holding her father's hand, now children watched her on TV from their living rooms. Schools hosted assemblies on her name. Teachers printed her quotes on bulletin boards. Barbershops debated her strategy like it was Sunday football. Then one morning, as she sat reviewing quarterly metrics, her phone buzzed. A familiar name. First Horizon Community Bank. The same bank that denied Elijah Thornton twice, that marked him high risk after inspecting his property through a segregated lens. Now they wanted in. They requested a meeting, high priority, the subject line read. Their pitch, an exclusive partnership to help scale her vision nationally. Malia didn't decline. She let them wait. 6 weeks. Then she scheduled a breakfast at a mid-tier diner in Atlanta. No 5-star conference room. No catered breakfast platters. Just eggs, black coffee, and a short memory for people who deserved none of her time. When the banker arrived, suit pressed, smile overextended, he extended his hand. I just want to say, Miss Thornton, it's an honor to finally meet you. Malia returned the handshake but didn't smile. You met my father once, she said. Same branch, different agenda. He paled slightly. Well, times have changed. She held up a hand. Have they? She asked. The man hesitated. I'm here because you see money now, she continued. But where was this outreach when I was raising my first round in back rooms and family cookouts? He cleared his throat. We'd like to correct that history. You can't, she said, but you can pay for the future. She laid a folder on the table. It contained a new scholarship fund, the Elijah Thornton Legacy Award. a 10-year $15 million endowment for black students in underserved zip codes who wanted to pursue business ownership and innovation. First Horizon's name was printed on the bottom, but small, barely visible. Fund this, Malia said. Fully, no branding, no photo ops, just redistribution. He nodded slowly. She stood. I'll have my team send the wiring details. She left him there, coffee untouched, folder in hand, stunned by a negotiation unlike any he'd ever known. Elsewhere, her transformation echoed. She returned to her old high school and stood beneath the same flagpole where she once read Langston Hughes out loud to no applause. Now the school auditorium bore her father's name. The old librarian cried when Malia cut the ribbon. But it wasn't all praise. The white media circled her like vultures in tailored suits. Editorials questioned her qualifications. Headlines softened her name. The former intern now running a fortune firm. They asked if she was radical, if her plans were sustainable, if equity meant loss. One even ran the headline, "From Fire to Fortune, the racial undertones of Malia Thornton's power play." She gave no interviews. Instead, she published an open letter in The Atlantic. This wasn't revenge, she wrote. This was restoration. Revenge burns fast. Restoration builds slow. It's not about the enemy. It's about the foundation. I didn't come to destroy legacies. I came to correct them. The article went viral. Universities dissected it. Harvard republished it in their leadership journal. A historian on CNN called it the most honest articulation of 21st century reparation strategy ever printed. Meanwhile, Camille restructured the company's internship pipeline. Malia signed off on removing the old portraits from the lobby, replacing them with framed grants, scholarship winners, and letters from high school students who saw themselves for the first time in a CEO. Inside the boardroom, the tone had changed. Even Langford's most reluctant holdovers now followed her lead, because her vision wasn't chaos, it was clarity, and profits, surprisingly, were rising. One evening, after signing the last round of Q3 audits, Camille knocked lightly on her door. Malia looked up. "Something you need to see," she said. She handed Malia a manila folder with a simple label, "Confidential offer, Vanguard R&R." Inside was a poaching offer from one of the nation's top venture competitors. Vanguard Risk and Recovery was offering double salaries to 3 of her key engineers. The firm had lost a major DEI contract and wanted diverse optics fast. Malia read it twice. "They're not even hiding the desperation," she muttered. Camille nodded. "They assume we're still reacting. Not ready." Malia's gaze darkened, not with fear, with calculation. She picked up her pen.
"Ready the team. We're not going to fight them."
Camille tilted her head. Malia smirked. "We're going to buy them." Camille raised an eyebrow. "You mean Vanguard?" Malia nodded. "Make the call," she said. "Let's see how well they operate under black ownership." The town hadn't changed much. There were new stoplights now. A few gentrified cafes nestled beside the older laundromats. But the soul of it, the pulse under the sidewalks, remained unchanged. Red clay still lined the gutters. Children still chased cracked basketballs through the streets after school. The air still smelled of pine and distant ash. It was a Saturday morning when Malia returned. She didn't come with a press team or a convoy. No camera crews. No sponsors. Just her mother, 2 folded letters, and a building that once used to be a textile warehouse. That building was now the Thornton Center for Economic and Cultural Justice. Inside, the walls had been sanded down to their raw truth. Brick and metal, aged but honest. The exhibits told stories of black Southern resilience, not just struggle, but survival. From black entrepreneurs who opened shops without licenses because the system wouldn't grant them one, to farmers who built wealth from land no one believed they could own. But at the heart of the museum's center hall, beneath a single warm spotlight, was Exhibit 1, the charred remains of Thornton Printing and Copy. Mounted on a steel pedestal, the sign stood upright, sealed and preserved in glass. The burn marks were still blackened, curling through the letters like veins. It hadn't been repainted. It wasn't clean to perfection. It was left exactly as it was pulled from the ashes, except now, there was a plaque beside it. "What they tried to destroy built me. Malia Thornton." Beneath the sign, a digital tablet cycled through images. Elijah Thornton's handwritten notes, journal excerpts, photos of the original shop, a short audio clip of him reciting a Langston Hughes line at a local rally. Visitors paused here longer than anywhere else. Not out of pity, but reverence. Malia stood back that morning, hands folded as a small crowd filtered in. Some wept softly. Some just stood still. Some took photos and whispered to their children. But none of them touched the glass. Clara stood beside her. dressed in a deep green dress, a gold pin on her chest, the same one she wore when scrubbing bank floors. She reached for her daughter's hand. "Your daddy would be proud," she said, voice wrapped in quiet thunder. "I hope so," Malia whispered. "He would," Clara insisted. "Because you didn't just win, you remembered." They stood in silence, watching as more people entered, their eyes wide with history. One teenage boy stared at the scorched wood, like it held a secret he needed to memorize. Later that day, Malia gathered a group of young girls from local schools into the museum's second gallery. Some were barely 10, others near 18. They wore school uniforms, hoodies, church dresses, braids, and dreams. She walked to the center and knelt to their level. "Everything they told me I couldn't do," she said, "was the blueprint for what I built." She pulled a small envelope from her blazer and handed it to the program's director. "It's for the exhibit. Display it however you choose." Inside was a letter. It read, "To the black girl reading this, they'll tell you you're too loud when you speak up, too quiet when you're strategic, too bold when you dream, too soft when you cry, too different when you lead. Ignore them. You are not here to be tolerated. You are not here to be molded. You are here to own what they said you couldn't. This world will measure your value by the fear it has of your potential. That fear is your mirror. Walk toward it. And when the door won't open, build your own. Buy the land it stands on, and teach others how to walk through it. Malia Thornton." The letter was placed under glass near the exit, alongside a small bronze plaque titled, "Letters Never Sent." That evening, as the sun began to set, Clara returned home, but Malia stayed behind. She walked through the empty museum, past dimmed exhibits and closing staff. She made her way to the final wing, a quiet, reflective space modeled after her childhood living room. There was a couch there, intentionally similar to the one her father once sat on. A shelf with old books. On the wall, a restored photo of Malia, age 10, standing beside her father with a red wagon full of flyers. He's laughing in the picture, his arm around her, her eyes focused, already plotting. The final room was empty, except for one girl, no older than 12, seated cross-legged in front of Exhibit 1. She wore glasses too big for her face and held a frayed purple notebook in her lap. Malia stepped closer, quietly. The girl didn't look up. She was writing. As Malia drew near, she saw the title forming across the top of the page. "Dear Future Me." The girl paused, then scribbled, "They don't see me yet, but I know who I am." Malia watched, the corners of her eyes moistening. She didn't interrupt, didn't say her name. She simply stepped back into the shadows of the exhibit and let the next story begin. Outside, the museum lights dimmed for closing, but before they did, the sign flickered one final time. The blackened wood seemed to glow faintly, not with fire, but with hope, and at the door the same young girl turned back, clutched her notebook, and whispered to herself, "One day they'll say my name too." If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or remember someone who's still fighting to be seen, then don't let it stop here. Like this video to keep stories like Malia's alive. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their pain can become power. And if you believe in stories that expose truth, uplift legacy, and challenge silence, subscribe to this channel.